This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Iran ramps up its uranium enrichment close to weapons grade. What are Israel's options? We'll hear from a fighter pilot who struck Saddam Hussein's nuclear reactor 40 years ago. Plus, unique Jewish archives rescued from Iraq are in danger of being returned and possibly destroyed. And counting the Omer, the biblical link that connects Passover to Pentecost. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Although sabotage damaged one of Iran's key nuclear facilities recently, the regime maintains it's closer than ever to creating weapons-grade uranium. Israeli leaders met that boast with the promise that they will never allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. After accusing Israel of attacking the Natanz nuclear facility last week, Iran moved to increase its uranium enrichment.
The Iranian decision to start increasing uranium to 60% is disturbing. It is, I think, a signal to Israel and to the world powers that it is not going to be deterred by attacks on its nuclear facilities. Iran is trying to increase its leverage in the talks in Vienna.
Iranian President Hassan Rouhani vowing they can go to 90% weapons-grade uranium anytime they want to, although the 2015 Iran nuclear agreement restricts enrichment to under 4%. At a meeting seeking cooperation with Greece, Israel firmly declared its red line.
We will do whatever it takes to prevent this extremity to success, and definitely will prevent this regime from having nuclear weapon.
Meanwhile, in Vienna, a potential breakthrough between Iran and the five powers who signed the original nuclear agreement.
We think that maybe the talks have reached a state where parties can begin working on a mutual draft text. The writing of the text can begin at least in the areas that mutual agreement exists.
Here in Jerusalem, Israel's diplomatic security ministers reportedly are concerned the Biden administration wants a nuclear deal at all costs, putting Israel on the diplomatic sidelines with little influence on the talks in Vienna. How to destroy Iran's capability to build a nuclear bomb has been the main challenge facing Israeli leaders for nearly 2 decades. So what are Israel's options? I spoke with a former Israeli general who identifies 5 steps to neutralize this existential threat facing the Jewish state. You're listening to the sound of Israeli pilots destroying Iraq's nuclear reactor in 1981. 26 years later, Israeli pilots destroyed this nuclear reactor in the Syrian desert. Retired General Amos Yadlin took part in both attacks. He flew with 7 other F-16 pilots to destroy Saddam Hussein's reactor in 1981, and as chief of military intelligence in 2007, helped plan the attack inside Syria.
In a way, maybe I'm the only human being on the globe who was involved in destroying 2.5 nuclear programs. And I guess we are discussing tonight the half.
We are, exactly. Tell us, General, what makes Iran in 2021 different than Iraq in 1981 and Syria in 2007?
The Iranians are ready for a possibility that attack will be launched against their nuclear facility. So they put them under the ground, in bunkers, in tunnels, in mountains. They disperse them. They have a redundancy of programs. And they don't want to reach the nuclear bomb as fast as possible. They want to reach the bomb as safe as possible, not to pay the price.
In this exclusive CBN News interview, General Yadlin said the change in U.S. administrations had an impact on Iran.
After they see the change of administration in the US, they lost their fear, so they are breaching all the agreements on what they are allowed to do in the nuclear field.
Yet he still believes Israel can stop Iran's nuclear program and laid out 5 steps he believes could make it happen. One is a stronger diplomatic agreement that blocks Iran's path to a nuclear bomb. The second is sanctions or other means to make Iran pay a heavy price for its nuclear program. Third is covert, cyber, and clandestine operations.
Number 4 is Air Force taking off. It's a military attack, as it was done in Iraq and Syria. And number 5 is a regime change, because I think we can sleep good at night if there is a regime that's not calling for the destruction of Israel.
Yadlin says over the years, U.S. presidents from both parties declared their commitment to the state of Israel. Now he wants to put that in action.
I think the wisdom that we need in Jerusalem is how to take this title, we are committed to the security of Israel, and make it an operational contingency plan agreed by the two countries.
A major obstacle? The U.S. and Israel look at Iran differently.
Iran is not existential threat to the U.S. Iran, with nuclear weapon, is existential threat to Israel.
With the recent attacks on Iran's nuclear program, Yadlin puts Iran about a year or a year and a half away from a nuclear bomb. He says Iran needs to enrich uranium to weapons-grade level and develop a nuclear warhead to be able to build a weapon. Now the race is on to see if diplomacy or military action will stop this threat to the existence of the Jewish state. CBN News also talked with Republican Congressman Michael McCaul in Washington, D.C. about the threat of a nuclear Iran. He's concerned the Biden administration is too eager to re-enter the nuclear deal.
I think the last time we saw this under the Obama administration, they entered into the JCPOA, very eager for a deal, but not a good deal. I think they just wanted any deal on the table, and I think history will show that was not a good one. And I caution them also to not strip any of the sanctions that are in place until we see real concessions by Iran. I think the previous administration gave them a gift, if you will, of leverage on the table to negotiate with Iran. But I think at the end of the day, George, the ultimate issue is, do you trust the Ayatollah? And I think it's a very steep climb.
McCaul also addressed how Israel and the U.S. can work together to stop Iran's nuclear program.
Well, one thing is clear, and I think it's clear that I wish the president would say this, that a nuclear Iran is not acceptable, and we will do everything within our power to stop it. Israel is prepared to do that, and Israel is our ally and partner in the region. They are the one most at risk by Iran, and if we enter into a bad deal, they are the victim, if you will, primarily of that. We know that the Ayatollah said they have 60% enrichment. We also know within a matter of months they can be up to 90%, which is significant because that is a threshold to develop a nuclear warhead. Attaching that to a short-range missile that they have probably take within a year. But these short-range missiles already have the capability to reach Israel and also the Saudi Peninsula. So it's a real threat in real time. And I hope the diplomats can succeed, because otherwise we don't want war, obviously, with Iran.
And finally, would the U.S. back a military strike on Iran by Israel?
I can't speak for this administration on that point, but I certainly would. I think Israel has every right to defend herself. They have the capabilities. They have the Iron Dome as well. I think Israel would be the one that would launch the offensive strike to take down any nuclear bomb.
Coming up, a new report examining religious freedom around the world with sobering conclusions.
It was not my grace, but God, that I might come to the Irish nations to preach the gospel.
Now available from CBN Films, I Am Patrick. Get your DVD for a gift of $15 or more. What brings you back, Roman?
People thought that this mission was crazy, that his efforts to Christianize Ireland were doomed to failure.
From slave to missionary.
Who among you heeds the call?
Why would this man put himself in danger among enemies who do not know God?
From sinner to saint.
Patrick's story began a chain of events that is quite remarkable in the impact that it had.
I am Patrick.
Those are the words that begin the history of Ireland.
I Am Patrick. Get your DVD of this inspiring documentary today. Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com.
nutrition, exercise, essential oils, weight loss, and more. It's Healthy Living with Lori Johnson.
Talk about what's in this.
Join CBN health reporter Lori Johnson to get the latest information from today's top health experts.
This is fantastic.
Find out what you need to know to live a healthier life. Watch Healthy Living Tuesday night at 8:30 on the CBN News Channel. A new wave of anti-Semitism is sweeping the globe, and the Jewish state faces hostility at every turn. Now is the time for Christians to support Israel. In CBN's free booklet, Why Christians Stand with Israel, you'll discover why Christians support the Jewish state and why we must stand together with the Jewish people. Get your free copy today. Call now or go to cbn.com/standwithisrael.
For millions of people around the globe, freedom to openly practice their faith is just a dream. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom monitors the world to shine light on the issue. And it's just released a complete picture of places considered the worst offenders. Jennifer Wishon has the details.
Christians are being persecuted around the world at a pace not seen since the 1st century. This as China terrorizes millions of Muslims while conducting business as usual with the world.
For a very small budget every year, the United States government drops this bomb in the human rights community that reverberates on every corner of the globe.
A bombshell annual report on the state of religious freedom around the world by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. A grim tale of staggering proportions. 50,000 Christians held in North Korean prison camps. Some 3,000 Yazidi girls and women missing in Iraq. 130,000 Muslims in internment camps in Burma. As many as 3 million Uyghur Muslims in Chinese concentration camps.
In our first report, we raised concern 22 years ago about what the Chinese Communist Party was already then doing to the Uyghur community.
But the world didn't pay attention. Now the communist regime works to reprogram an entire community, while subjecting some to barbaric procedures like organ harvesting.
They even marketing the Uyghur organs in the countries, Muslim majority countries. They find two particular religions, Islam and Christianity, problematic for the survival and existence of the Communist Party.
The report identifies countries of particular concern, the worst offenders. 10 are already designated as such by the State Department. Commissioners recommend India, Russia, Syria, and Vietnam also be added to the list. U.S. ally Turkey is listed as a Tier 2 offender.
We're not letting them sleep one night without us screaming at the top of our lungs in a bipartisan way, Republican and Democrat, to make sure they can do what they choose to do, but they're not going to do it in the shadows.
The commission points out the pandemic added to the burden, as many religious minorities were blamed for the outbreak.
It's time for Christians to do what the Apostle Paul called them to do, which is to pray for those who are in prison as if they were there with them.
Commissioners encourage the Biden administration to fill a number of vacant positions dedicated to putting pressure on countries that persecute their people.
Up next, a new film about the danger to a unique archive that tells the story and preserves the identity of the Jewish community in Iraq.
His story has inspired the world for thousands of years.
Israel's most famous king.
While some scholars doubted his very existence.
You cannot claim that King David is a mythological figure.
Journey deep beneath the ancient city of Jerusalem and see proof of Israel's celebrated hero. Get written in stone, House of David. Join host Gordon Robertson on an expedition through the evidence supporting the Old Testament.
Extraordinary discoveries made headlines around the world.
See where the shepherd boy slew the mighty giant.
We are shedding some light on the story of David and Goliath.
Explore the relics of the Davidic age.
There was a significant structure standing here.
And discover proof of King David's legacy.
This is a royal house.
written in stone, House of David can be yours for any dollar amount. Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to CBN.com. Available now.
Here, we're committed to a heritage of rigorous scholarship dating back over 1,000 years.
And to a faith tradition dating back 1,000 more.
This is how we create a culture of inquiry where no topic is off limits.
And a culture of hope.
Anything's possible!
It's Christian leadership.
And it's changing the world for the better.
It's higher learning.
It's greater knowing.
It's what makes us whole.
It's what makes us Regent.
"18 years ago, a unique Jewish archive was rescued from Iraq. Now many fear it will be returned to the country that already drove the Jewish people out. As CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl tells us, a recent film says the threat to the archives is only a symbol of wider ethnic cleansing that is going on in the Middle East.
This story begins almost 3,000 years ago in Iraq. That's when the Bible tells how the Jewish people were exiled to Babylon, located some 60 miles from modern-day Baghdad. After the exile ended, many descendants stayed there for generations until the State of Israel was established in 1948.
One thing my mom told me, she said, when you leave Baghdad, never talk about the stuff that happened. Don't talk about it at all. She said, nobody wants to hear morbid stories because whatever happened was morbid. I told her, but why? I want everybody to know what we've been through if we survive, if we get out.
Filmmakers Carol Basri and Adriana Davis agreed the story needed to be told. Their documentary, Saving the Iraqi Jewish Archives, A Journey of Identity, tells how this Jewish community faced its own forced exodus from Iraq after more than 2,500 years. It sheds new light on the history of this community, the struggle to save the evidence of its existence, and the fight to keep the story alive.
I've learned that it's a much bigger issue than just things from the Iraqi Jews. It's also about the cultural and religious heritage of all ethnically cleansed people in the Middle East.
The archives, to me, became the sort of physical embodiment of the way the community was legally disseminated, because there is a legal precedent that detailed the laws that forced the Jewish community out.
Due to this growing persecution, more than 160,000 Iraqi Jews began fleeing their homeland in 1952. Over the following decades, Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi government continued to punish the community by stripping property, seizing religious and cultural items, and purging personal records, including photographs.
I don't know if people understand that when the Iraqi Jews left their homeland of 2,700 years since the first temple, we were not allowed legally to take anything out of the country except 3 sets of clothes and 50 dinars, and you could take your wedding ring. That's it.
I'm trying to go abroad to continue my graduate studies and so on, and word came back to show up at the headquarters of the internal security. They ushered me into a room where they were taking somebody out who was already being interrogated, and, it was all blood on his head and so on. It was a little bit of a frightening experience.
Fast forward to 2003, when during the Iraq War, the U.S. bombed the Mukhabarat secret police headquarters in Baghdad. Explosions ruptured the water system and flooded the basement. Based on an intelligence tip, Harold Rode, an Orthodox Jew working for the Pentagon, and others entered the building and found the collection of Jewish belongings underwater. With U.S. military help, they rescued nearly 20,000 personal and religious artifacts confiscated from the Jewish community, some hundreds of years old.
This whole project is a project of miracles. Hashem, God put me there. As far as I'm concerned, I was there to be there to help make this project work.
Items included Torah scrolls and prayer books, as well as documents of the Frank Eni School, the last Jewish school in Iraq. It closed in 1972, and its founder, Frank Eni, was Basri's grandfather.
The school that my grandfather founded was founded because of the Farhud, which was the pro-Nazi uprising in Iraq in 1941. Well, there was no Israel then.
The damaged artifacts were shipped to the National Archives in Washington for restoration.
In watching how that community left, to have miraculously found all this material, religious, cultural, personal material, to find all those items was to me the actual physical embodiment of the spirit of the Iraqi Jewish community.
The U.S. government's initial agreement indicated it would return the archives to Iraq, where there are just a handful of Jews left today. The State Department is trying to work out a new deal whereby the archives would stay in the U.S. The Jewish community is concerned that if it's returned, it will only be neglected or, worse, destroyed. And they say the items belong to them anyway. Iraq argues it wants to put the items on display as part of the country's national heritage.
I believe that the Iraqi Jewish story is an important story to tell, and it can only be told with the artifacts, the cultural and religious artifacts that are part of the Iraqi Jewish archives.
The filmmakers see the driving out of the Jews as the same kind of ethnic cleansing from which so many Christians in the Middle East have suffered during the last decade.
I believe that that is a universal story. It's not a Jewish story. As someone from not that background by birth, I understand the parallels to early Christians, or, even what's going on now. We just heard about it in the news when the Pope visited.
Davis says they need another miracle in order to keep the archives in the U.S. safe and accessible to tell the Iraqi Jewish story to generations to come. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Still ahead, Counting the Omer, the 49-day biblical link between Passover and Pentecost. Thank you for watching Jerusalem Dayline. We're committed to providing you with unbiased reporting from the Holy Land. Through weekly broadcasts, podcasts, and online media, our vision is to reach millions around the globe with the true story of what's happening in Israel and the Middle East, all from a biblical and prophetic perspective. This is a big vision and is only made possible by the generous support of people like you.
Call us toll-free at 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/Jerusalem Dateline and make a donation that will help spread the light of truth about Israel throughout the world. Now, for a limited time, you can get 5 of CBN's critically acclaimed documentaries. Experience the rebirth of the modern state of Israel.
The historic bonds between the Jewish people and the land of Israel cannot be broken.
Relive the battle for Jerusalem in the Six-Day War.
Jerusalem is yours, forever.
Discover how Israeli volunteers are changing the world.
When people need us, we volunteer and we come and help.
Explore the world of Israeli technological innovation.
We're people of dreams. God gives us dreams. And that's really the roots, I think, of much of our innovation.
And understand the biggest land dispute in history.
Many Palestinian Arabs claim that the Jews stole Arab land. But is that the real story?
This exclusive Israel DVD collection can be yours for a gift of $40 or more. Call now or go online to get your Israel DVD bundle today.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries, and with your help, we can do even more. We are out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
Hey,
If you're tired and exhausted all day, you can't think clearly, and you really just need a cup or even a pot of coffee to get through your day, then join me, Dr. Josh Axe, for this new series where I'm going to teach you how to transform your diet and use essential oils and supplements to get a better night's sleep.
Wake up to your best life. Call 1-800-700-7000 to get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
After the Passover, the Bible tells the Jewish people to count 49 days until Shavuot or Pentecost. And there's also a significance in this biblical link for Christians. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl takes a look.
It's known as counting the Omer, found in Leviticus 23, where it says, "From the day after the Sabbath, Passover, the day you brought the sheaf, or Omer, of the wave offering, count off 7 full weeks, count off 50 days up to the day after the 7th Sabbath."
It's a link. Think of a chain. The Omer connects Passover to Shavuot. It's an unbreakable chain, and there's an important spiritual lesson in this for us. It teaches us that salvation is both redemption, what took place at Passover, but it's also the indwelling of God's Spirit, empowering us to walk out that salvation.
An Omer was a unit of measure used for grain in Bible times.
So the Omer is counted every night after the evening prayers of Ma'ariv. We will say the Omer together. We'll say the day and the week and the time, and we'll acknowledge that. And then we'll read a text from Psalm chapter 67.
Boaz Michael from First Fruits of Zion says the Omer would have been counted this way in the time of Jesus, and his disciples would have prayed the traditional reading of Psalm 67 prophetically. It says, "That your way may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations, and all the nations of the earth shall fear him."
So by counting the Omer, we're thinking about, we're reflecting upon not only what took place at Passover just a few weeks ago, but we're leading up to a time in which God gave us His Torah, His instructions, His will, and His wisdom in order that we may be that saved, redeemed people that He set us free to be.
The Bible says that on Shavuot, known as the Feast of Weeks or Pentecost, the Holy Spirit was poured out. Jewish people celebrate this day as the day when God gave the law to Moses.
What takes place in Shavuot and Pentecost? The Spirit comes down, the nations are represented, and the message was that God's salvation is not just for the Jewish people, but it's for all nations. And that's what took place in Acts chapter 2, was a fulfillment in many ways of this prayer that the Jewish people have prayed and continue to pray, that all nations, all people will know God and His instructions and His ways.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, what a great lesson and prayer for today's troubled world. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blasts so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.